We thank Chris Bryant for joining us this morning. Chris is an attorney for Perkins Coie and lives in Washington, D.C., although he has history in Charleston, South Carolina. He promotes himself online as a voting rights lawyer, a topic of extraordinary interest to Americans from coast to coast and everywhere in between. How you doing this morning, Chris? And are you still on track to be a Supreme Court justice?
I'm doing well, Bill. Thanks for asking. And I think I fell off the Supreme Court justice track a little while ago. I don't know about the whole background check if I would get through that. But
hey,
yeah.
Look, if Kavanaugh can make it through, I'm sure you're easy sailing yourself.
Hey, there's hope. There's still hope.
It's really interesting how we connected. A few weeks back, I had received a sudden email from YouTube that our channel for the Greenwood County Democratic Party, which has over 100 videos published to it, was suddenly taken down and suspended due to spam, false content, some extraordinary claims. Now, considering that our channel was mostly interviews like what we're doing right now, I was quite surprised and took to Twitter to publicize the situation while we appealed. Now, unprompted, you were gracious and generous enough to reach out and offer us support. Now, we successfully appealed and we got restored, and we still don't know why we were taken down. But is this something that you've seen happen often, and have you had to deal with this with others before?
No, so hadn't seen it happen often. I have seen sort of these retaliatory things play out where, it is politics for some people is a zero-sum game. And for whatever reason, some people, instead of resorting to just ideas or wanting to talk about things, will pull tricks. So there's an example, I want to say New Hampshire, somewhere in the Northeast, where a Republican operative hired people to jam the Democrats' phone line, which was what people were using to get rides to the police. This is not quite the same thing, but it's not that hard to imagine someone reporting, just saying we're gonna take these down. And so had a couple of people who'd run afoul actually on minor music things, but that is what it was. But this is just not too hard usually to get things back up.
Now, you have a very interesting personal story, and I've seen professional journalists have done a far better job of exploring it better than I ever could. But I do understand you graduated from Duke University, initially majoring in economics, and then went on to become a special ed teacher in North Charleston. And then you went back to Duke to pursue a law degree. Was that always the path, or was that just the case of a young man finding his way to a career?
Oh, so only correction was that it was North Carolina, not North Charleston.
Oh, okay.
That's the only correction there. And it was in Durham. So I was in Durham for that period of time. But that was not always the path. And it was definitely a young man trying to find his way. And I guess you could say I'm still in many ways trying to find my way. But I went to college actually saying that I was going to do biomedical engineering. And went for 2 years in the engineering program, was doing basically nothing but engineering classes, and realized I didn't really want to be an engineer. And so sort of had stepped back. And the one thing that I've sort of had constant throughout is saying that I want to help people. And so when I was looking to graduate, one of the areas where I'd be able to help people was in an area of teaching. I'd done a little bit of education stuff while in college. After teaching for a while, it was kind of all right, what else can I do to help people? And I thought law school would be great. So maybe I go to law school and figure out how to fix education law. And I'm not doing education law, but I think it not all in the plan, but hopefully figure out where I need to be someday.
I was fascinated to learn that you had a front row seat to the Dylann Roof trial. Now, Dylann Roof, as we all know, murdered 9 people, all African American, in the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. So from a legal, professional perspective, that had to have been an incredible opportunity and experience, but from a personal perspective, it had to have been gut-wrenching. How did you come to be there, and what lasting impact did that have on you?
So I think actually I'm going to have to steal what you said, because I think that kind of, from a professional standpoint, it's sort of an opportunity that there are not many of. But from a personal standpoint, it definitely had elements that were incredibly gut wrenching and sort of, I don't know, saddening. It doesn't capture what it is. Unimaginable is maybe the best way you can think about it, because you never really think about that. I was clerking for Judge Gergel, and he doesn't always have end dates for his clerks. He hires people, and then you kind of stay. Some judges say you're there for a year. Some judges say 2 years. Judge Gergel is basically like, it's a year, and then we'll see what happens. And so as we were about 8 or 9 months into my clerkship, Judge Gergel realized that he was going to have this trial, and basically said, hey, Chris, I like you, but if you're not going to be around for the entirety of the case, you need to get out so I can get somebody else in here who's going to be here the whole time. And I had a day to decide, and I decided to stick around, and the rest is history on that front.
What was the first thing that went through your mind when you saw Dylan Roof walk into the courtroom?
I guess so. The courtroom. So folks have an idea of sort of maybe the courtroom during the trial, but there are pre-trial moments as well. So I know it's kind of hard to, point out, distance of space, but, I think the first time was maybe just like a private hearing, with just his attorneys. I don't even know if there may have been attorneys for the government, and you're maybe 10 feet away. And it's kind of a realization of like, this is where it's unimaginable. You're seeing a person who did atrocious, unimaginable things, and is just right. It is close enough to touch. It feels like it, and that's not quite an exaggeration. Maybe 10 feet away. I think you always expect, and I think this is something that people did with Dylan Roof. You expect someone who does that and does these things to be something to be like off about them, right? Like obviously mentally ill or obviously deranged in some way. And the thing that I think sort of stuck with me a little bit, and sort of continues to stick with me is just how that was not the case, right? It's like if you did not know what you knew, this is just a person, and that itself is a little bit frightening.
Right. Well, after after some years of being in Charleston, you are now in D.C. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. How did you come to leave South Carolina? And aside from the Greenwood Democrats, we're talking with today, how do you still maintain ties to this area?
Okay. Well, I fell in love, is I guess the way to say it. So, my now wife, I met her while I was clerking for Judge Gergel. It's kind of a twist of fate, but she started after I would have left, and so if I had not stayed for the Dylan Roof case, I would not have met her. She's kind of the exact opposite of me in having a life plan, and she knew for kind of forever that she wanted to work in the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the Department of Justice. And so she got her dream job at that spot, and it was a 3-year commitment, and it was in DC. And I said, I'm not going to do this long distance thing for 3 years and figure out what's next. We're going to go to DC. And
okay. Now, was it at Perkins Coie that you had initiated that class action lawsuit against the South Carolina Department of Corrections?
That's where I finished it. Okay. I started it when I was in Charleston, still at Yarborough Applegate, and that was a really great experience. I think I was the 5th lawyer in that firm. I'm at a firm with over 1,000 lawyers around the globe, but I was the 5th lawyer at Yarborough Applegate. And so it began by me getting appointed to a case to represent an individual inmate, Russell Geisler. And he was basically suing on his own, pro se. He was writing all the papers in prison, suing the prison for not testing him or treating him for having hepatitis C. And he got far enough along that the court said, okay, well, you've got a claim here, but you need a representative who's a lawyer and can get you through it. So I got appointed to represent him and went out to see him in the prison, talked about it, got his records, looked at different things. And after reviewing his file and reviewing different things, realized that it wasn't just a problem for him. It was sort of a system-wide issue. There were, like, South Carolina prisons just weren't testing for hepatitis C or treating for hepatitis C, in part because of the expense. And it had very different impacts and effects on people. It's a slow-moving disease, so it might take 30 years to kill someone, but it can create permanent damage. And if basically the response that Russell Geisler was getting from the prison system was, you're not sick enough yet to get treatment, he kind of went to bed every day thinking like, well, how much sicker am I getting? What do I have to do, to do that? So, worked with Mr. Geisler and a couple of other inmates to bring class action, and got it turned around, got a great settlement. Brian Sterling with the prison system was, once I think there's the realization of what the problem was, everybody sort of got their heads together to figure out how to make it.
It's interesting because you hear class action and you figure it's a scheming lawyer who's got this big plan, but really this came from a person-to-person connection and then just grew from there. Yeah,
it's person-to-person connection grew from there, and I'll say it's luck, honestly, because it just so happened that a couple of years before that, like, hepatitis C is curable. I don't know if you remember on TV a year ago, it seemed like you couldn't watch anything without getting some sort of hepatitis C, right, advertisement. And part of it is because it before was something that was not curable and treatable. It was very painful to treat. But now it's like, take pills for a few months and like 99% cure rate for the vast majority of it. And so just the timing, if it had been 2 years earlier, the case would not have gone anywhere because the medicine wasn't there.
I would like to pause our conversation with Christopher Bryant for a moment to make a quick pitch for you to financially support the Greenwood County Democratic Party. Over the past year, we have worked very hard to keep our party alive and active, working hard for our Democratic candidates and principals in these difficult pandemic times. If you've enjoyed the virtual content we've been bringing to you for the past year, please consider making a donation to help cover the costs of web hosting, Zoom subscriptions, mailings, printing, and so on. Anything from $5 to $500 would be greatly appreciated, and I personally guarantee would be put to good use. You can donate using a credit or debit card through our ActBlue account. Just visit our website and click on Contribute. Or you can write a check made out to Greenwood County Democratic Party, P.O. Box 73, Greenwood, South Carolina 29648. Thank you. Okay, so now to the topic at hand. You list on your Twitter profile, voting rights lawyer. Now, I can't help but notice the irony. As a resident of the District of Columbia, how does it feel not to have voting representation at the federal level?
So I guess this is the moment of truth. We moved from the district during the pandemic, and now I'm actually speaking to you from Baltimore. Okay. So although my workplace is still in the district, it feels good to have an actual voting representative in Congress now. But it was something that thought about when we moved to DC. Was okay, so we can vote for president, but that's about it, right? Like,
it goes right from president down to mayor. I mean, there's a big gap in between, right?
Yeah, and hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, folks will do the right thing, and DC will become a state. But yeah.
So, as a voting rights lawyer, is that your official responsibility at Perkins Coie?
So voting rights lawyer is sort of what I say. I think my official title is associate in the political law group. But most of the time I am on the side bringing a suit, against a state or state agency, Secretary of State, Board of Elections, for some sort of law or practice that impedes voting rights in some way, shape, or form, or that's the allegation. And so the Mark Elias is the head of the group here. May have some familiarity with him because he is blown up on Twitter, especially after the most recent election. But he sort of is the captain of the team when it comes to that. And we look at cases all across the country. So in the past year, we've brought cases. I've been on cases in South Carolina. So we had 3 different cases in South Carolina, and I was on 2 of them. We had cases in North Carolina that I was on, Arizona, Iowa, Michigan. And that's just cases that I've been on. And
what's an example, the type, maybe just one example of a case that you were involved in? What's the nature of the suit that you bring?
So there are lots of different types of cases. And I'd say last year there were maybe more cases that were brought because of COVID. And so there was a real worry and fear. And you may remember sort of toward the beginning when everything was starting in March and April, are people actually going to be able to vote? What are the, if you think about long lines or just people standing in lines, people crowding into gymnasiums, not knowing at that time whether it was spread by touch, whether it was spread by how contagious it was. That led to a lot of litigation, which basically said, hey, people shouldn't have to risk their health and safety or the health and safety of their loved ones to vote. We had, in more normal times, we brought a lawsuit against the state of South Carolina because South Carolina was one of a handful of states that requires, and you may be familiar with this, but requires voters to put their social security number on their full social security number on the voter registration when they register to vote. So if you're standing in front of a Harris Teeter or Piggly Wiggly and you are getting people to register to vote and talk them up, you explain why they should register to vote. You walk them through the process and it's all right, name, all right, they're with you. Address, they're with you. Social security number. This is starting to seem like a scam. And so sort of the claim there was that it inhibited voter registration and voter registration activities. And we reached an agreement with the state to not require the full social security number on those. So that's one way to make it easier for people to register and then easier for people to vote.
How does, since you're so familiar with South Carolina on this topic, how do we compare to other states such as, Georgia, who's been making all the news lately, enacting their set of voting restriction laws? How does South Carolina compare to a Georgia versus, say, a northeastern state where it's perceived that voting is a little more free?
It's tough. So I would say good and bad. There's some good and there's some bad. One of the, I think that it's unfortunate that there's not more parity in the competitiveness between Republicans and Democrats, so that, South Carolina is not as purple as North Carolina is, or sorry, as Georgia is, or North Carolina, I guess. It means that there's a little less urgency from the legislature to restrict voting rights. That's sort of what it seems like. So it's not like you have. So Republicans are in power in these states, and they're seeing that power slip away, and they have a very real fear of losing that power, becoming the minority in a ruling sense. And although I think it'll be pretty hard, you won't often get people to say it. What's motivating most of these laws is a recognition that if more people vote, and especially more of the new voters vote, be that new citizens, be that younger voters, be that people who have not voted before, then then Democrats tend to do a little bit better with those voters. And so how do you keep those people from voting? You pass a wide variety of laws that potentially make it harder to vote.
Is there anything we should be watching for? I mean, any legislation out there that we need to really keep an eye on?
And so that's what I'll say. I think that I think it might actually be my pinned tweet right now. And this is one that I saw just sort of like scrolling through, and I saw that there was a bill S129 that is basically gets rid of South Carolina's election commission, like abolishes it. And one of the things
that's SC votes to us. We know that intimately through SC votes.
SC votes, right? And so it would get rid of the commission. And one of the things that I think has kept South Carolina honest, for lack of a better term, is the existence of a bipartisan, although it's not equally bipartisan, but there is a bipartisan elections commission that is sort of implementing and overseeing a lot of different things. And if you take that away and you replace it with, this is what S129 would do, replace it with a partisan Secretary of State, who then is given additional power to do, who knows what. That's when things get a little bit scary. There's another bill, a House bill, that will almost assuredly pass because it's got a ton of co-sponsors. I think there are 63 or 64 Republican co-sponsors to this bill. House 4162. And it makes it's tricky kind of because it applies only to absentee voting or people who absentee voting by mail and people who register to vote by mail. And what it would require is if you register to vote by mail, so that would be the people who are registering to vote in front of the Harris Theater, you had not voted in person before. So you hadn't come and shown a photo ID or done that before. You would need to mail in a photocopy of your ID if you were voting absentee by mail. That is basically the bill.
That's exactly what Georgia passed, which is a requirement to have a copy of your ID stuck in an envelope and gone in the mail.
That is, yes. And so it wouldn't apply to all voters.
Right.
It would only apply to first-time voters. But if you think back to what I just said, the first-time voters are the ones that they're trying to target. The people.
Now, we sometimes feel helpless when our elected leaders, like our own right here in Greenwood County, have a complete disconnect of logic on this subject and won't hear any differently. For example, our representative helped shut down any use of drop boxes in the November election. Now, in Greenwood, we have a drop box. It's located right outside the door of the elections office. It's monitored by surveillance cameras, and yet our representative decried that as not secure. Yet, it's perfectly okay for me to stick my absentee ballot in my own mailbox, flip the little flag up, and any Yahoo can come on by. So there's an absolute disconnect of logic between what's considered secure and not. What can we do when our elected officials won't listen to us or take voting rights in a serious manner? Or you want to just give out your number now? Maybe that's the answer.
Yeah, give me a call. No, it's not. I think that this is going to be a big fight and a big question in South Carolina, but I think kind of across the country. And this whole question of election integrity. And I'm not going to actually give that word, that term, any credence because it means absolutely nothing right now. It is something that people are saying, oh, we have to do things for the safety of the election, and then they can say, oh, Democrats are opposing election integrity. That doesn't mean anything. They have created this myth of. I think that the only thing that folks can do is try to hold their elected representatives accountable. So, and also on the flip side of that, be realistic. So what I'll say about the Dropbox situation is South Carolina does not have in statute anything that says you can have a Dropbox. It also doesn't have anything in statute that says you can't have a Dropbox. But by not having any sort of regulation, Greenwood County might be great and might have the most secure Dropbox. But pick another county. I don't want to slander any county, so I won't pick a county specifically. But that county might not. Maybe they've just got the equivalent of a mailbox, but it doesn't have video, right? And so I think that it is the most helpful thing that people can do is show that they are taking election security safely, but actually then also making it easy for people to vote.
Well, Chris, that's true Supreme Court justice wisdom you just laid on us right there. So I got to point that out, and I hope we all take heed of what you just said. All that other talk is good, but at the end of the day, if people aren't getting out of their seats or taking the action to submit their ballot, then it's all for naught. Chris, thank you so much for your time. This is going to go down as probably one of the more memorable interviews for the Greenwood Democrats, and we're lucky to be able to secure some time with you. You have any parting words for our members before we call an end?
Don't lose hope. I guess you could go with the state motto, right? Mm-hmm. While I breathe, I hope. I think we live in a society now where explicit structural injustices can be addressed and handled and torn down. Explicit structural roadblocks that are put into place by legislatures can be handled in the courts. But that's only one part of the process. There's everything else has to happen outside of the courts, and that only happens with people. So I think it's don't give up hope.
All right, thank you, Chris. Well, we're breathing and we're hoping. Wish you a great morning, and I do hope we get to see you again at some point in the future.
All right, Bill. Well, thanks for having me, and I hope so too.